everyone. I am delighted to see you all after this long, unexpected break that we had. Today, we have with us one of the most outstanding actors of my generation, and we loved him as Almanzo Wilder, Laura's love interest in The Little House on the Prairie. Dean, it is so wonderful to have you on. Dean Butler, everyone.
Well, Miriam, thank you so much. And I'm so honored to be your first show back after an unplanned absence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful to have you on. As people can see, you have released a memoir. This memoir.
Yes, I'm there right next to you.
You're right next to me. Here you are. You've hardly changed. I remember watching the show when I was 9 years old, and I think you came in the last 4 seasons.
Yeah.
Was that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And oh my goodness, Laura was ready for this. Laura Ingalls was ready to grow up, and they handed her this gem of a prince.
Well, how lovely of you. You know, I don't think Melissa was actually personally ready for it, but yes, being the trooper she is, she stepped into it, but it was not an easy time, Miriam. No. You know, there's an 8-year difference between us, and now, of course, it's nothing. But at 15 and 23, that was a big age difference between us. And Melissa had really no life experience to prepare her for what this was going to be, and she just was a trooper, you know. But it was not. Absolutely. It was not her favorite moment, I don't think.
Yeah, and it must have been very difficult for you too. I mean, a wonderful show, a huge experience for a young man. What were you, 23?
Absolutely.
Around about that?
I was 23. Yes.
And
I was 23. I had just literally turned 23 2 days before I started. And so
And by the way, happy birthday.
15. Oh, yes,
happy
thank
birthday.
You for that. Well,
it was a couple of days ago.
It was 68 and counting.
No, not possible.
Yeah.
Not possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
For all of us who watched the shows. And of course, it's important to remember that you've been in so many different genres. You know, you've done stage work. You played Tony in West Side Story. I'm presuming you've had a number of interesting conversations with George Chakiris and other Harlan.
you know, actually, I have not had any conversations with George Chakiris. But yeah, well, what an iconic show. And yeah, it was a lot. I had never been in a situation where I was going to be asked to do 8 shows a week of anything. And you know, anybody who knows West Side Story and knows the role of Tony knows that like the first 17 minutes of West Side Story for Tony is that's most of the show in that first 17 minutes. And it's a lot, and a lot of vocal pressure in that first little bit of time, which, you know, in all candor, when we started this, I grew into it, but I was not prepared for what was being asked to me vocally. There was no basis to really know what that was. And, but, you know, after doing it for 10 weeks, by the time we were well into it, it was getting it open. That was the hardest thing, because of course you're working, and we were rehearsing in New York. And then we had to fly to Japan and then go into 2-a-days in Japan for the week before we opened. And then you open to this, you know, 8-show, you know, an opening and a matinee, and the next day. I mean, it was a brutal time. And after that, it got much easier. But boy, getting the show open was tough. It really was. But what a great experience! What incredible music! The coolest thing, or the most interesting thing, Miriam, about performing in Japan, and maybe you're aware of this, but I did not know it when we went in there, is that, you know, the Japanese are very respectful of performers who are working in front of them, and they have a reverence for West Side Story. I mean, I think that the dancing in West Side Story, and this was an A production of West Side, so this was a Jerome Robbins sanctioned production of the show. So
Yes.
They don't make a sound during the show. There's no applause. It's like you're performing to this vast empty space. You can sort of feel the energy.
Yeah.
But you don't hear anything or see anything. And it was really wild. I mean, when you're working on the stage, you're accustomed to getting some feedback to
Of course.
sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like doing the show on camera in a way, in a sound stage, because there was no stops, no cuts, no do it again. No, you're doing it full, but it was a very sort of eerie experience at first. And then of course at the end, there is this wonderful thunderous acceptance of what you've done. And you get that affirmation, but not until the end, not even at intermission. There is no sound
Nothing.
in the theater. Yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah. And was this the first time that the show had gone to Japan?
I don't think it was the first time the show had gone to Japan. It certainly was the first time in current times. West Side's been revived on Broadway and obviously elsewhere. It's a classic. It's been revived many times. I don't know, frankly, how many times the show had worked in Japan, but it was just a beautifully mounted production, and the 60-piece orchestra in the pit, and in Tokyo and Nagoya. And I think we worked in 4 different Osaka. We worked in 4 different cities in Japan, and the farther out of Tokyo we got, the harder it was to figure out what we were ordering in restaurants when we went.
Yes.
In Tokyo, it was very clear. You had the sort of the wax models of the food and some sense of what it was. By the time you got way out of Tokyo at the end, you really didn't know what you were ordering. So it was that was sort of an interesting culture, but wonderful, gracious, enthusiastic audiences when they applauded at the end.
They meant it.
Yes. They meant it. Yeah, no, it was a lovely experience, and to be able to be involved in a show like that was really incredible.
And this jumping between genres, I mean, you then went to Sondheim as well, didn't you? You knew Stephen Sondheim? I'm very interested in this, Dean, because I'm a professional singer, so I can appreciate how it would have been for you. You're still, Are you in your 30s still at this stage?
Yes. I was I think going into the Broadway experience, I was 32. So I was 32 doing Tony, 32 stepping into Into the Woods.
Rapunzel's Prince
at the Martin Beck Theater on Broadway. It was the first replacement for Chuck for the Rapunzel's Prince part. I got to do the show with at some point with all the people who had originated these parts. That was a thrilling experience. And, I had never dared to dream of working on Broadway. It just was not something that was in the spectrum of my thinking and dreams. I felt, as much as I think as a performer, I think in many ways I'm better suited to working on the stage, but but because I had done most of the work on camera, I just was thinking that's where I belong. And yet I think I'm probably more organically suited to working a little bigger in front of an audience. And when I went to audition for Into the Woods, I auditioned for Stephen and James Lapine, and for Paul Gemignani, who was the music director, and Joanna Merlin, who was the wonderful casting director. And I had not really auditioned for a major musical before doing that. Now, I had auditioned privately for West Side Story at my agent's house, and Alan Johnson, who was directing the show, came to my agent David Westberg's house. We had a pianist there. I sang and read for him. He hired me. And then I went to, some months later after returning from Japan, invited to come and sing for Stephen Sondheim. And which is, I mean, what a heady thing.
Oh, I can't imagine what that must have been like. I mean, just to have known him.
It was amazing. So, I walked in and I said to them, and I was always very polite coming into a room, and I introduced myself, and I just said to them, I haven't done a lot of this kind of auditioning. I'm not sure what to do now. Well, Stephen got up from behind the table and he walked over and shook my hand, and he said, now you're going to hand your music to the pianist, and you'll come back here, and when you're ready, you'll sing for us. I mean, yes. So he really was, it was very disarming. And so I sang, and having spent that time in Japan singing, I was singing at that point really, really, for me, really well. Yeah. And so I sang the Agony and Hello Little Girl, which was the double for that part, and sang them, I think, quite well. They offered me the part 2 hours later. I mean, I didn't even have to wait overnight. I got a call that afternoon with an offer.
That is so unusual. That is so unusual. It is just amazing.
Yeah, it was kismet. It really was. And then to go to New York and work with that cast and in that theater, in that space, to be in New York in that way was just a really extraordinary experience. It really was. One of the great blessings of my life, no question.
I'm sure it was. Now, just to remind people, we are speaking about Dean Butler's memoir. It is out on the 25th of June. And right now it is the #1 in the pre-order, Amazon's pre-order in basically the drama category. And at the moment it's leading. So, get in there, get your pre-order.
I had no idea.
Yes, it is it's right up there, #1. And it's just, I tell you, Dean, what I found about the book, because every memoir that I discuss with people, I always read it fully, right the way through. And the way I have to be careful how I use this word, the way you craft what is basically your story. This is not just like writing a screenplay. This is your story. This is your life. But you are still taking that ability to articulate, that ability to convey and keep things simple and reverent. And you, of course, you open by, making the point that you've always been mannerly and you've always been respectful.
Yes, and I was raised that way, no question. Yeah,
could well be what that very thing was, that key thing was that Michael Landon saw in you, that he knew Laura needed that character needed that respectful, that someone who teamed that sort of thing. It was teaming off him almost like perspiration. You had that. We could see it as viewers. And maybe those other roles as well, Rapunzel's prince would have required the same thing.
Yeah. Yes, I think, when you think about, the first big thing I did was this wonderful love story based on the Judy Blume novel Forever, which was, the first love story. And
1978?
That correct. And, really, that was sort of the 1,000,000-to-1 shot. Mary Goldberg, who was the casting director of that, met me in San Francisco where the movie was going to be shot, and everyone else was coming from Los Angeles. And she said, you're perfect for this, but it just, this is going to be really a tough thing for you to get. So that was, I think, Miriam, I think you've sort of touched on you have touched on the central theme of my professional life, certainly as an actor, is that I was always in my career, and look, I have not had this massive career, but I had a nice career, and I was always hired to be the man in love with the woman whom the story was really about. So I was sort of this cast as this ideal man for, and
Yes.
and these were not stories about women who were young women who were going to be put in compromising situations or
No.
difficult situations or unhealthy situations. I was cast to be that ideal man in that situation. And that's what these parts all were. And I think I really feel like the my upbringing and my first love in my real life experiences really reinforced what would make me right for those kinds of parts. And I have never pushed back against that. That is not something that, I mean, I've always been grateful for that. um you know, I have not been, especially, look, every young guy wants to feel like he's sort of steamy and hot and all that. That was not, I mean, as much as I, would have liked to have been perceived that way, that's not who I am. I am a much more straightforward, um, sort of hard on the sleeve guy. And that's sort of always what I've been in the relationships, that certainly in the early relationships of my life, always that way. And I think I just carried that right into the work that I did. And I think it was a really good ride for me. And having being associated with something like Little House that is so beloved for, I mean, here
Yes.
we're celebrating 50 years of Little House this year. To be
Unbelievable.
associated, yeah, it's a wonderful thing to have been a part of it. And it's such beloved material. The
It
stories
is.
are beloved. The book is beloved. The series is beloved. To be associated with those characters is just really, truly the gift of a lifetime. It's just no question about it.
So you were very involved in the 50th, weren't you? You were very
Oh yeah,
involved in the organization of it. And it was what,
yes.
March, just March gone?
It was March. It was March 22nd, 23rd, and 24th of this year in Simi Valley, California, where the show was, where its home base, the home base exteriors of the show were at Big Sky Movie Ranch, a very famous Southern California location for Westerns and all kinds of other productions.
Yes.
And we did this event there, and we recreated the facades, the exterior sets on the ranch, geolocated where they were. Now, they were not three-dimensional, they were two-dimensional, they were fronts, but just wonderful recreations of these sets. And so we ran bus tours through the ranch that went very well, other than Friday night when it rained and really shut us down on Saturday. We couldn't get anyone in there on Saturday, but okay, that was the one hiccup in the event. I think the thing that I am most proud of and most thrilled by is the fact that we were able to recreate the interiors of three major sets. We were able to recreate the interiors of the Little House, of the church school, and of Olson's Mercantile. And they were
Stunning.
beautiful recreations of these sets to scale, to absolute scale. Maybe the Little House was slightly larger than it had been, maybe just slightly, but the feel of it was so right. We had they were wonderfully propped, and we had wonderful A/B comparison screen grabs of what the sets had looked like. And our prop people went out and found these things and put them in. And to walk into the space that we had, that was a gymnasium. We
So
were at
how
a,
long, the planning then, how long would that have been? If you had prop people involved like that, seeking out various things that could be found, that must have taken some months. I mean,
definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, the initial dream of this event, and I was not involved at the very beginning, Miriam. It was about a 5-year process to that. Those earliest dreams of it began in 2019, just as the pandemic was kicking in. The pandemic really shut it down for a couple of years. They got serious about, the Chamber of Commerce in Simi Valley got serious about it again in 2022. I came into it in, I want to say early 2023, and I came into it to try and be a mediator between the business aspect of the event and the people who were so passionate about it creatively that they didn't care what it cost.
Yes.
So you're fighting with this, or there's a tension between the reality of having to do it and the dream of wanting it to be everything. And
Yes.
you can't do everything. You can do, and we did a lot.
Yes.
And I think we exceeded our expectations on the event. I think it turned out.
You did.
Yeah, I think it turned out it was bigger than we thought it was going to be.
I couldn't get there, but I followed everything. I followed Alison Argram's videos and Melissa's and yours. I mean, you've got wonderful social media, by the way, at official Dean Butler for anyone who wants to follow Dean on social media. Yeah. And also you have your website, of course, as well, but you're very active on your Instagram. And I think that was wonderful because people were able to see the changes and see this vast place. And the fact that all the relevant cast people turned up, Karen Grassley, Melissa, Alison Arngrim, who I've also interviewed, absolutely wonderful people. And it came across to us as spectator viewers as though in some ways you had all refound each other, kind of, there was that sense of we've just been waiting to get back to this point.
Yeah, I think, we have stayed as a cast, the core cast of people of which I became a part of in 1979 and joined this wonderful group of people. The core group of people have stayed in the main pretty close. I think the magic of this event, Miriam, was the fact that people came. Over 18,000 people came to Simi Valley that weekend from 27 countries to join with us. And there was this outpouring of love and appreciation and gratitude. It was all so good. It felt so amazing. There was just, everywhere you looked, there were smiles and joy and happiness. It's like you're with a group of people and you can all look each other in the eye and you all know you're there for the right reason. And you all believe in the same thing as that was the beauty of it. Is anybody who took think about people coming from around the world to come to this. When they were there, this is what they had dreamed of. And we didn't, the great thrill was, at least what it felt like, Miriam, is we didn't disappoint anybody.
No.
They got everything they hoped to get. That's the feeling that we had. The lines were long. They were very long, and we had to lose our tours on Saturday because we simply couldn't get into Big Sky Movie Ranch when the roads were muddy. Fortunately, they dried out enough overnight so that we could get tours back onto the ranch on Sunday, and we got a lot of people in, but we had to cancel 1,000 tours on Saturday.
Oh my God.
And that was a lot. And we had to refund all of that too. So, we had to refund $75,000 after Saturday. And
all because you were a success.
Because so many people came. Yeah. And you couldn't plan for, you couldn't know what the weather was going to do, but it was so beautiful when you were there. Every aspect of it was beautiful. And this was organized and put together by, the real nuts and bolts building of this was done by super fans, the people who actually did it, who the man who recreated the sets, the blueprints for the sets. There were no blueprints for the sets that could be gotten. He designed these sets based on screen grabs that he'd been capturing for years. And what was fascinating is he knew how tall Michael was. In his boots, Michael was about 5'10", 5'9", 5'10". Eric scaled the buildings. After he did all the drawings, he scaled the buildings with a 5'9" figure and compared what Michael looked like in the sets to what he was actually scaling in the blueprints and what we would actually build. So there was really no way of knowing exactly what it was because there were no actual blueprints. I mean, we didn't have access to them. They exist somewhere, but we didn't have access to them. What we achieved was just breathtaking. And everybody, when we had Good Morning America there on Wednesday before the event, and Melissa and Karen and Allison walked into our sets, which had just been fully installed the night before. And they walked into that space to see the thrill in their eyes. And, Melissa's not easily thrilled. I mean, she has seen a lot. And Karen is not. And Allison is so loving about everything that she's going to see that you knew that she was going to be pleased. But to see Melissa and Karen be so delighted by this, it made it all work for me. And then you watched people who'd stood in lines for hours, literally hours, to get into these spaces, and to watch them come in and watch their eyes pop open as they looked at what they were seeing. Sets, recreated costumes, memorabilia from the show. And there's not a ton of it, but we were able to collect from cast members a lot of things that we were able to put on display. We had Michael's wonderful model car that the cast and crew gave him in 1976. I saw that.
Yes,
restored.
That was fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, there were just so many amazing things. And then beautiful art that was done by a wonderful artist named Orlando de la Paz, who painted all the facades and at the ranch, and just beautiful portraits of our deceased cast members just brought them back to life. It was so filled with love and joy, and it just worked so amazingly well. We were just all knocked out by it.
And that was palpable. That was really palpable, even for those of us watching from the other side of the world. That I can only imagine what the next one's going to be like.
We're actually getting ready to do a smaller version of it because it worked so well, and because so many people expressed a desire to see it all, that you're hearing it first. The sets are going to be reinstalled in a location in Simi Valley. The tours are beginning again on June 8th. So and June 8th and June 15th are the first two sets of tour days that we're doing at Big Sky. This will go on at least through the end of 2024. So that
goodness.
Yeah. So we expect that we're going to see some people coming from a lot of different places to see this. And we'll put memorabilia back, and we'll put costumes back, and and we'll do holiday things. We'll do Halloween, and we'll do Thanksgiving, and we'll do Christmas in this space. It's going to be really special.
What was the idea, Dean, about blowing up the sets? It seemed quite a drastic thing to do, considering by then everybody knew, and you were in those final episodes.
Sure.
Everyone knew how iconic the show was and would be into the future, even by then. And it just seemed an extraordinary move.
Well, the thing that it was motivated by the reality that the sets had to be removed from Big Sky Movie Ranch when the show was actually over. So Michael, being the ever inventive executive producer that he was, he reasoned, if I have to tear the sets down anyway, and I think he wanted the sets torn down because he wanted closure on this. He wanted there to really be an ending. And this really gave him a way of ending it. He had to tear them down anyway. They all were going to go away. But when he realized he could get some production value and something stunning on film to end it, it was when he was told that it was confirmed to him by our wonderful producer, Kent McCrae, that as they were looking at what this movie was going to be, and I think Michael knew what the basic idea of it was, but when he was told by Kent McCrae, we do have to take these sets down. And I think that really came into clear focus for Michael for the first time. And he said, give me about an hour. I want to think about this. And he went away to his office and he sat down, as he did inevitably all the time, and just started, his imagination just went to work. And he came back in about an hour with this outline for what the show was going to be that included this storyline of the town has been, Walnut Grove has been purchased by somebody. I don't know that I loved the message. The basic message was, if we can't have it, you can't have it either, was sort of the message. I didn't love that message, but it was a wonderful visual thing to create. And it definitely put a finality on everything. You knew you were not going back there ever again. And I think that was the great way to end it. There always would have been a temptation, I think, to buy it from NBC or some other forces that be said, let's do another one. And Michael, I think, was very clear that once he put a button on this, he did not want to go back to it again. And this was a way of achieving that.
And with regard to Michael Landon, I was really really so impressed at the way you dealt with all the different stories and subject matter that we hear from time to time surrounding him. And there's a thankfulness. It's always difficult talking about a memoir because you don't want to say too much on a podcast, because naturally, that should be saved for the book. But at the same time, I can't underline enough how the thankfulness, the sense of being humbled that you put across from the very, very beginning, that he gave you so much. And yet at the same time, you do say, that, you experienced the steel, you say, of Michael's voice and the bite of Michael from time to time. Yeah. And you're only 23, and he's asking of you, as the showrunner, he's asking of you that you trust him. Yeah. And that's very hard for someone that young, because you will know that, and you do make the point in telling these stories that you wanted to try and educate yourself and read up on things, and you were asking him advice, and he really didn't want you doing that.
Well, he didn't want me reading things other than, he wanted his work. He said, just read what I write. That's all you need to worry about. And really, in the context of what he was doing, that's right. I mean, that was the right answer. I could read about pioneer life, and I could read about what that life was, but Michael had his own vision for what this was. Yes. In the very beginning of the series, there was a major conflict between the gentleman who really developed this for television, a man named Ed Friendly, and Michael. Yes. Ed had a vision that he wanted the Ingalls family to be a little dirty, barefooted, hungry, because there wasn't enough food and all that. And Michael just flat out rejected that path. Yeah. And his feeling was, we may not have a lot, but I want the audience to always feel that we have enough, that everyone is clean, that everyone is well kept. We may not be wealthy. The Ingalls were not the Olsons, which was our, Walnut Grove's, the wealthy family, but we have each other. We have love. We have goodness. We are coming from the right place. Michael never wanted the audience to worry about the Ingalls. He never wanted the audience to look at the Ingalls girls and say, oh, they their face is dirty, or are they going to hurt themselves with their bare feet in all of that. Michael didn't want any of that. I think he was I think he was absolutely right about this, particularly in a series television environment where you are starting off at, you're starting off at zero again each week. There's got to be some basis of stability from which you begin each episode, and then you step into the challenge of that episode and you overcome the challenge of that episode, and you're back to normal again. Yes. At the end. And I think Michael understood the rules of episodic television so well. Oh, wow. Following up on his 14 years of Bonanza. He really got what this genre was.
Yeah.
Ed Friendly believed deeply in these books, and he loved the stories, and he was convinced that this is what the audience should see. But Michael knew or believed, and he said it many times, there was not enough action in the books to sustain years and years of programming. And when you start, you don't know where this is going to go. I mean, Michael didn't know it was going to be successful. The fact that it went for over 200 episodes, that becomes what it becomes over time. But he knew he had to introduce other characters, other situations. There needed to be action and humor and so on. Laura's books were about what people did to survive in very challenging circumstances. What Michael wrote about was what people felt in a whole range of circumstances, happy circumstances, tragic circumstances, but it was about an emotional life.
Yes.
Every episode was Gone with the Wind.
Yes.
Musically. There was a richness to what was done emotionally. It was simple circumstances, nothing fancy. But the emotional life was you were so vested in the emotional life of these characters. And that's where Michael lived, is in the emotional experience of the people, because that's what the audience, he believed, and I think he was right, would invest in, was the emotional connection that these people had to each other. It was very powerful.
Well, just on that point, and forgive me for digressing a little bit, but when the Ukrainian war started, my survival job had been language teaching. And I hadn't done it in a long time, but when the war broke out, I went back into it to see if I could help. We've thousands of Ukrainians here, all very educated, professional people. But this week, knowing that I was going to be speaking to you, I decided I would play the pilot episode of The Little House on the Prairie. And although they had Santa Barbara and the Beverly Hillbillies, the Little House never made it over there. So it was their first time to experience it. And I played episodes with you in it and the pilot. The pilot episode in particular really resonated because it starts off, if you remember from having, I know you didn't watch it initially, but if you saw it later, you'll know that they left the forest. Yeah. The forest was being invaded by so many people. There was no more game. They couldn't actually find anything to eat, so they had to move. Well, this resonated so deeply. And with every class that I showed it to, tears, just tears. And they all wanted to see the other episodes, and they all wanted to see what happened next. And they wanted to know who you were. And it's all completely new for them. All these 50 years on.
Wow. That's amazing, because Little House runs in over 140 countries around the world every day. The fact that it didn't get to Ukraine.
Ukraine.
That's really interesting.
So to know that actually is touching them afresh now, 50 years on, that is actually some achievement. I mean, it just shows you his writing and his vision. His genius was amazing, and he might have had a bit of a fight on his hands over the rights and what have you, but he certainly got his message across.
No,
but
I think,
Dean, you're so adaptable. Your adaptability through the different things that you did. You mentioned at one stage that you were, I think you were, I don't know if you were heading into your 40s at this stage, but just you were around 1997. I was doing all I could to transition into documentaries. And you tell this lovely story about how you put something together that was in documentary form for the family.
Yes, right.
And you were
Oh, God, how nice,
exposed.
Miriam. You really have read this. Thank you so much.
But
Yeah.
it's so few actors have that adaptability, that ability to
Mm,
jump genre,
mm,
because there are some
mm.
one-trick ponies, but also go into the other areas and know them, screenwrite, and actually, pour yourself into the technical side. This new technology coming along,
Yeah, yeah.
and you did
And
that.
it was really fun. I had watched the wonderful Ken Burns documentary, The Civil War, that was so popular on PBS here in the United States, and I'm sure it's run in different
Yes.
countries. But PBS,
Yes.
The Civil War was obviously a huge part of American history in the 1800s. So
Yes.
um, this was very powerfully told with beautiful music and wonderful black and white pictures that really came to life, and beautiful narration, just an evocative experience that brought you into this war in a personal way that we'd never seen before. And I found that incredibly moving. And I just thought I'd love to be able to use some of that technique to tell a story. And when my step grandfather told me that he wanted to tell the story of his life, it was a moment. And I just said, well, I can try and do this for you. And I loved it. And I identified a small but very capable, inventive team to help me with this. And we just cobbled it together. And the process of doing that was, unlike as an actor where you are the last one hired and the first one done, basically, there's all this pre-production and there's all the post-production that happens after the actors are done. To have the opportunity to be there for the blank page at the beginning and have something at the end that you can hit play and it comes up on the screen, I found that really was magical for me in a way that acting never really had been. I loved doing these things. I loved being in Little House and the other things I did. No question about that. But those experiences were not as emotionally, intellectually fulfilling to me as the process of actually writing something, shooting something, crafting something so it becomes its own cohesive thing. It was a very basic effort to start, but it was incredibly exciting, and it did propel me into what my life really has become since then. And this was really, late 1990s as I'm pushing my way in this direction, and loved it. And it's led to a lot of wonderful experiences.
And so right now, you are producing shows. You've been, as you mentioned, David Feherty. As when we were in the preamble
Yes.
earlier, you were
Yes.
mentioning David Feherty, and
Yeah.
pro Irish golfer at one stage. I think he was in the 1991
Ryder Cup.
Ryder Cup, wasn't he? And
Yes.
he
Yes.
he actually he
Yes.
was very successful. And then you're introduced to him, perhaps
Yeah.
not the greatest golfing fan. I know wasn't it basketball you were interested in, and
Yeah, I
swimming?
was very interested in basketball. I didn't know anything about golf, and
Yeah.
I was asked to join this little group to put this show together for a company called NBC Golf, and they had made a decision that they wanted to do this talk entertainment show with David. David was, as a Tiger Woods at that moment, at that time, and for many years prior to that, was the biggest star in the game of golf. David Feherty, as an announcer, was the biggest. Tiger and David were the two biggest names in golf at that point. David as a commentator, Tiger as a player. Interestingly, we never had Tiger on the program. because David was not going to ask him the questions that he would have to ask him about all the things that had been challenging for him. He was not, and Tiger would not have come on because he didn't want to answer those questions.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
it just,
and he knew that. Yeah.
Yeah. David was very clear on that. But these two guys were, that's how big David was and is in the game of golf. He's a singular presence in the game of golf with a wonderful sense of humor, and his origin story or his backstory. What made David such a powerful interviewer is that David, in all the best sense, is one of the most flawed human beings you're ever going to meet. I mean, David was every kind of addict. He was addicted at some point to everything. I mean, he certainly was. He's a recovering alcoholic. He'd had his runs with other kinds of drugs. David was a walking, talking train wreck in terms of, he had it under control, but he was always working at it. And I think what made him, that humanized him enormously.
Yes.
For the people he would have as guests. And everyone who sat down with David knew, if you were going to look at flaws and missteps, no one that he talked to had done as much screwing up in their life as he had done.
He had.
And so it's like, there was no way that no one was going to get the gotcha question that was going to be like the thing that was just unforgivable. David had all of that, and he was so open about it. And the audience, and there are so many people I came to find out, and you sort of know this, but I came to find out for sure, working with David, that there are so many people who struggle with addiction, with missteps in their life, who are in a constant struggle to recover and just keep moving forward on a day-to-day basis to just get through, today, get through the next hour, the next, all of it. And so he brought all of that into this experience. And David, for those, your Irish audience knows, I mean, David is a wonderful communicator. He's wickedly funny. Yes. And he's a wonderful, wonderful writer. I learned so much about about trying to back on the overuse of adjectives working with David, because I would write for David for voiceover and all kinds of things and packaging, and David would just cross out all the adjectives. He would take all the adjectives, all the amplifiers he would take away, and it made everything much simpler, much clearer, much less wordy. He really helped me, and he was so generous to me. And, my writing, when comparing my writing, there is no comparing my writing to what David could write, but he was so patient with me as I was trying to, crafting and finding his voice. I think I did find his voice nicely, and I certainly loved trying to imitate him as I was doing temp voiceover for him as we were doing packaging in shows, and hearing his voice helped define what the message of the packaging needed to be, because he was so specific. And I think audiences loved him. Those shows, we did over 150 hours of Faraday over a 10-year period. I produced 80 hours of the program myself, and helped with live shows, and he was a participant in all those things. But that was really, I loved that. And I think that was the most opportunity I've ever had to be in one situation after another, going from the blank page to the finished product, because you had to, series television is feeding a beast, and the beast is air dates, and it just voraciously consumes material. Those deadlines demand something of you, and you've got to come through. And
is this something you love? That's what I was going to ask you. Do you love that?
Oh, I do. Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. The pressure of that really gets my attention. I mean,
Yes.
I can procrastinate around a lot of things. You cannot procrastinate
Around that.
and that
Yeah.
for long term against an air date, because it's coming and you will not miss it.
Yeah.
You can't miss it. And I worked with an executive producer named Keith Allo, who I'd been working with for over 20 years. Keith is the one that hired me into this situation. Keith had a very generous way about him, but boy, it had to be done. And he would leave you alone to do what you were going to do. And he gave very good notes, but he did not micromanage. And he let us all find this. And I think over the process of the 10 years we all had working together, I think we did some, look, some are going to be better than others, but we did some really nice shows and shows that I'm really proud of. And one of my favorites was early on when we did another Northern Irishman, Rory McIlroy. In his first appearances. I mean, Rory had just won the US Open. We went to Northern Ireland to interview Rory, and he was tremendous. And we put David in Northern Ireland and let him walk around and, stand in front of a rainbow and walk up, walk around castles and talk. I mean, it was so atmospheric, and it was a wonderful way to step into the program.
Absolutely. You'll have to do, or at some point he will have to do Shane Lowry as well. I think that would be
we did do Shane Lowry at the very end. Yes, I did that show. I didn't finish the show, but I did produce the show in the field. And he was great.
My gosh, that's what I just want to come back to the concept of pioneering, because I mean, that is something that is very much part of you in so many different ways too, and it kind of leaps off the page of the memoir. And you talk about the father figures in your life, and not just your father and whatever ups or downs there may have been there, but you're also bringing immediately from the beginning of the book, you're bringing Albert Alfonso Moore, your ancestor, into play really early on in the memoir.
Yes.
And did you feel you had to do that? Because if I can just, there's a quote, it actually comes much, much later in the book, but you say, just with regard to your ancestor, one of his quotes, in fact, was, Napoleon had little reason to fear not being remembered, but my ancestor did. And so do many of us. I know this is one reason I'm writing this memoir. That's you talking about, looking back at your ancestor's life. He was worried about not being remembered.
I think when you look at that, I think we all are. And as you get older, when you're young, you think you're going to live forever. And because your context is so short, you just feel like you're always going to be there. When you get a little older, as I am now, just having turned 68, and hopefully I've got a little time left.
You plenty.
But you realize as you get a little bit older that we are here for just a blip of time, each of us. It feels like much longer than that, but really in the larger context of time and history and human affairs, we are here for such a short amount of time. And to have the opportunity to be remembered, even if it's only in the case of my great-great-grandfather, to be remembered by the members of his family that would follow him, or Laura Ingalls Wilder, who wrote these wonderful books that have made her simple life experience visceral for millions of people around the world. For me to have had the opportunity to be on this television series that transcends time and makes television, particularly if it's successful, and Little House obviously was very successful, there is an immortalizing quality, that gift that television provides. I will forever be, as long as it's digitally out there, 23 to 28 years old in this beautiful setting. That is an amazing, amazing gift to have. And that will, Michael said years ago, when I was 25, he said to me, people will be watching the show long after we're all gone. At the time, I didn't quite believe that. At 25, he said, "You're gone. I'm never going to be gone. I'm going to be here forever." Now at 68, I absolutely know that the show will outlive us all at the pace that it's on. The fact that now it's digital, which means it can move into any kind of exhibition format that's out there. Once that work was done, it becomes available forever. And who knows how long it will go on. But it's been a wonderful ride for me for 45 years, for the series for 50 years. There's no reason to think that 50 years from now, people won't still be watching and enjoying this. If they are, we'll all be that much more blessed. If they aren't, we had a great ride for as long as it lasted. But it's a very special thing to have been a part of and to be associated. I mean, these wonderful books, to be the personification of a character, a group of characters, to be part of that personification of characters that people love and have loved for generations. That is an amazing, amazing gift. And that's something that most people in television, where characters are invented out of whole cloth, there's no historical basis for this character in most series television. In this case, there is that, and that makes the reflection of these people that much richer and that much more permanent in a sense. As long as people are reading these books and watching this television series, we will live on for people. And wow, that's powerful. And my gratitude is boundless on that point.
You use a word, just as we come to the end now, you use a word throughout the book, and actually you're using it to talk about these loves of your life, both in real life and on screen. And even when you were talking about the situations that didn't work out so well, you had this lovely word that you used, and it really stuck with me, that the memory of even a relationship that didn't work out so well was like a touchstone. It's a touchstone, which is, I thought it was lovely, because all of us have situations in our lives where perhaps relationships, be they romantic or be they work relationships, don't work out. And it's hard to kind of broach the memory.
Yeah.
And it was almost like the word was a device to help you do that. To just say, look, as you say, we're here for such a short period of time, to just take the memory and just use it as a touchstone, learn from it. And Little House does that. That's part of the emotion, is the roller coaster ride. And it's an extraordinary thing to see that even happening, just even this week, to see people who are on a roller coaster being touched that way was really, really beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, the book is called Prairie Man, My Little House, Life and Beyond. Dean Butler is the author. It is the most wonderful read. It is a surprising read. It's full of advice for young people, those of us getting older, whether you're an actor, whether you're crew, it doesn't matter. There is so much advice there for you. I don't know if you set out to have it as a memoir full of advice, but that certainly happened. Dean Butler, I am so delighted that you came on the show, and thank you so much for joining us, not just here in Ireland, but in the UK as well, people watching. And thank you so much for being our guest today on Writer's Block Memoirs.
Miriam, you've warmed my heart. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you so much for being on the show.